This Embracing Change series was initiated by Hilda Hernandez-Ravel, who is our member support manager, and it was really her desire to create more education and understanding so that as we go through these phases, we have a ground and some understandings that we can build upon. So I really want to appreciate support for that. Hilda oversees the member support teams and created today's event, and so I will pass it over to Hilda.
Thank you, Andy, for your remarks, and some of it reminds us of the fact that this topic is relevant to all of us. It is really with great pleasure that I want to introduce to you, Andy there sits here if you like to see next, Dr. Stephen Pantilat. Let me tell you how this presentation happened. I will share with you that I love hearing public radio more than I have time to. And after dropping my elder grandchild at the airport, I tuned on Forum, and Dr. Stephen Pantilat was speaking. And I just was so excited about the wealth of practicality and sensitivity with which he presented to the public. He was speaking about his book, which I, of course, at some point had in my hand. Here it is. Life after the diagnosis, expert advice on living with serious illness for patients and caregivers. So, an important topic, and a person who is incredibly qualified. He is known throughout the world, I think, for the work that he does, for his sensitivity, for his care and compassion for patients dealing with mental, that's my other diagnosis, not with mental, with serious illness. Let me tell you about him a little bit more. Dr. Pantilat is a distinguished professor at UCSF, where he specializes in treating patients with serious medical illnesses. He is a pioneer and an acknowledged authority in the emerging medical field called palliative care. Over the past 27 years, he has treated thousands of patients with serious illnesses and has conducted extensive research on treating those patients. And Dr. Pantilat states, and I quote, and this is very rich statement in and of itself. Serious illness is one of the greatest challenges, one of the life's greatest challenges. Unfortunately, healthcare too often adds to the stress of serious illness rather than easing. Too many people receive care they do not want. Are you able to hear me? Yes. Too many people receive care they do not want, from which they cannot benefit, and fail to receive care they do want, which they would benefit from. By understanding the needs we have in our society about serious illness and learning the truth, we can get to live well and long with serious illness and adapt the healthcare system to address the needs of people with serious illness to provide high quality care. So it's with great delight and enthusiasm that I introduce to you Dr. Stephen Pantilat.
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Let's start with some good news and some bad news. So let's do the good news first. The good news is that there's never been a better time to be alive if what you want is to be alive. So you can see here that after being really flat forever, in the last 100 years, human lifespan in the West, in the developed world, has increased dramatically. It's actually increasing around the world. And you can see here that The year 1900, as Americans, we lived on average to age 50, and today we live on average to age 80. And that is a tremendous increase in lifespan over an incredibly short amount of time. And that's really great news. That's due to better health care, to vaccines, to antibiotics, to clean water, good food. So that's really wonderful, and that is good news. So what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is that over this exact same period of time, the death rate has remained remarkably stable, exactly 100%. Now, you didn't need to invite me here to tell you that. You knew that already. That's just the reality of how things go. But what's hidden in here that we don't recognize is that while we will all live longer, most of us will spend at least part of that time with serious illness. Maybe months, more likely years, for some of us decades. With illnesses like cancer, heart failure, Parkinson's disease, dementia, emphysema. There's a long list of illnesses. The good news, of course, is that there's a lot we can do for these illnesses that allows us to live for years or decades, but it creates new challenges about how we live well with illnesses that we didn't have to deal with in the same way 100 years ago. The other challenge, of course, is that when we get diagnosed with a serious illness, it's really devastating. I think of it like you're flying on an airplane, and things are going really smooth. Maybe you're having a drink, you're watching a movie, and all of a sudden, the plane falls 10,000 feet, and you look outside and there's another fire. And that's what it's like when the doctor says, you have cancer, you have Parkinson's disease, you have dementia. And you think the plane is going to crash in that moment, because that's what it feels like. But the truth is that in our society, it's not quite like that. The plane doesn't crash right away. And what I want to talk to you about today really is that there is a way to get control of the plane and to get it flying straight again. Now, what's true is that you may not be going to the same destination, and you may not stay aloft quite as long as you thought, and you're probably not sitting back watching a movie anymore. You're probably in the co-pilot seat. So things have changed dramatically as a result of that diagnosis. But there's a lot that you can do to get the plane flying straight and to bring it in for a smooth landing and not crash on the ground. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. And one of the reasons that so often the plane crashes and burns on the ground is because we have myths in our society, in the way we think and talk about serious illness, that rather than making things better, actually get in the way. And it's really a misunderstanding about serious illness and how we can respond to it. And if we understand the truth behind the myth, we can actually live better with serious illness and live long and well. And that's really what I want to focus my comments on today. And so I'm going to share with you 3 myths. So the first myth is this, that somehow you have to choose between quality and quantity of life. And the conversation goes something like this. If you want quantity of life, if you want to live long, take all the treatments that are offered. Chemotherapy, get multiple opinions, travel far and wide to different cancer centers, enroll in a clinical trial. That's how you live long. Or have that operation, or have the mechanical device implanted around your heart, or take as many treatments as you can. That's how you live long. Now, of course, some of these treatments are going to be uncomfortable. So you're going to sacrifice some of your quality of life, some of your comfort in the pursuit of living longer. So that's one story. The flip side is, well, you can decide to really focus on your quality of life. Being comfortable, not being in pain. That's the most important thing. So don't take those treatments that might be uncomfortable, and you'll be more comfortable, but you'll sacrifice some lifespan. You won't live as long, but you'll live well. But what I want to tell you today is that that's a myth. That's not right at all. And the truth is that you can have both. You can live long and you can live well. And my message to you is that with serious illness, palliative care can help you do both. So maybe I'm just going to take a moment right here. How many people have heard the word palliative care before? Oh, wow. Oh, my God. Okay, wow. That's the most I've ever seen. So you are the new benchmark. I usually say it's about half, but this is really amazing. So I've come to the right place. So you can have both. So let's talk a little bit about it. So you already know about this, but let me just share with you. So let me just start with a definition. So you've all heard of palliative care, but let me give you the definition that I like. And it's really simple. There are many definitions out there. If you Google it, you'll find the World Health Organization, the Center to Advance Palliative Care, all have definitions that are good. They're all good definitions, but I think it really gets down to this. That palliative care is medical care focused on improving quality of life for people with serious illness. That's what it is. So I was in clinic yesterday at UCSF in our new palliative care clinic. I saw with a new patient. I said, "Do you know why you're here?" And he started to talk about why I was here. I said, "Well, let me tell you what we do, what our team does. This is what we do." So it's focused on serious illness, people with serious illness, not about death and dying. Palliative care, it is also for people who are dying. We're actually pretty good at helping people who are dying become full. We'll talk more about that later. But the focus is on serious illness, the ones we talked about. Cancer, heart failure, Parkinson's disease, after a stroke, dementia. So it's about serious illness, and it's about quality of life. Abraham Lincoln said it's not the years in your life, but the life in your years that matters. And whether your life is measured in years, or even months, or honestly in the palliative care service, sometimes we see people whose lifespan is being measured in days. Still the question is, how do we help you have the best possible quality of life? How do we make each day as good a day as possible? So that's what palliative care is. What does it look like? I want to show this diagram. Maybe if you've heard a talk about palliative care, you almost always see something like this, a diagram like this. And let me just walk you through it. What this says is that, here we are at the beginning of the illness, the moment of diagnosis. And appropriately, the focus is going to be largely on cure, because, frankly, there's a lot we can do to cure illness. To treat cancer, to treat Parkinson's disease, to treat a whole host of illnesses. And we should be focused there, and yet there's still a role for palliative care right at the moment of diagnosis. Why? Because people have questions about it. So, when that engine is on fire and the plane's going to crash, all these thoughts rush to your head. Am I going to die? How long do I have? What I say is those are palliative care questions. They're not about the illness. How do I treat the illness? Which you also have questions about that. But they are palliative care questions that your doctor, nurse, social worker, they should be able to answer those questions and talk to you about them. And in fact, anticipate that you're actually thinking about it. What this shows is that over time, palliative care may play a larger role in the care that you receive because two things happen. One, sometimes more treatment just isn't available. Honestly, sometimes, although we have many treatments, sometimes we do get to a point where there are not treatments for the illness itself. There's not more chemotherapy. There's not more treatment, unfortunately, to reverse ALS. In fact, there's almost no treatment to reverse ALS. And therefore, palliative care plays a larger role in your care. Or, what we see sometimes is people say, you know what, I'm done. It's enough. I don't want to come back to the hospital. I'm not going to have another operation. Too hard. Too much. And therefore, palliative care plays a larger role. You see that there's a little dotted line here for hospice. I just want to say a word about hospice. The way we think about it, all hospice is a type of palliative care. It's palliative care for people who primarily want to receive care at home, whose serious illness is advanced, and for whom the prognosis is now about 6 months. That's the group of people that qualify for hospice. People who have decided, you know what, all that curative illness that you have, the operations and the chemo, that's not what I want right now. What I really want to do is focus exclusively on being comfortable and being at home and having a service that will help me. So I think of all hospice as palliative care, but not all palliative care is hospice. Right? All of this out here is palliative care that is not hospice. Palliative care you can get at home, palliative care you can get in the office, palliative care you can get in the hospital, palliative care that we're starting to provide in nursing homes. as you deal with your serious illness and as you're undergoing other treatments that are important for your illness. I put this here for all audiences, but also when I talk with healthcare professionals, just to remind us that it's important to think about bereavement and to think about grief and loss, and that part of our job in the healthcare system is to acknowledge that. And that after someone dies, caring for their loved ones is really important. And I think for all of us, just to remember that while the real painful grief of loss is there immediately, it does tend to ease over time. But this bar here along the bottom, it just reminds us that it never goes away. And sometimes other people say, oh, you'll get over it. But of course, we don't get over the death of people we love. It does get less painful, but it doesn't go away. And that just reminds us, and I say this also sometimes just to remind my colleagues that this is something that's always there for all of us. I like to call this helping people live as well as possible for as long as possible. That's really the goal. Now, you might argue that should be the goal of medicine. Generally, that's what the healthcare system should be all about. But too often it's really about just treating the illness without the living well part. And we don't really think about what that means. But that's what I say when I see patients in the hospital. So unlike all of you, very often when I see patients, they don't actually know what palliative care is. They don't know why I'm there. So I explain it, and then I say, this is my job. This is the job of our team. And even people who maybe don't know what it is or have a slightly negative view of it, they're like, well, if that's your job, then you can stay. I have to talk to you about that. That's why you're here. Okay. I want to share with you just a little bit of information about palliative care, about this idea that it helps you live well and long. And I'm going to do that by sharing with you one study. I think there's one study about palliative care that you need to understand. I'm not going to talk a lot about research, but there's one I want to share with you. This was a study that was done 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago, at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, at Harvard. In this study, they enrolled 151 people who had metastatic lung cancer. What does that mean? It means lung cancer that is spread beyond the lung. So it's already spread to other parts of the body. It is not curable. So we can't make it go away. We can treat it, but we can't cure it. And on average, people with this illness live about 9 months. So it is a very serious illness, for which there is chemotherapy available, but on average, people live 9 months. And so everyone in this study got standard cancer care at Harvard, which is apparently very good. I like to say it's not UCSF, but apparently Harvard is a good place to get your care. So then half these people were randomly assigned to get palliative care in addition to the cancer care they got. And then they followed to see what happened. And the bottom line is, everything good that we want to have happen to us happened to the people who got palliative care, which is to say, they had less pain, they had less shortness of breath, they had a better quality of life as they judged it. They were more satisfied with their care. They just felt like their care was better overall. They were less likely to die in the ICU. They were less likely to receive chemotherapy in the last month of life, where evidence shows us that it doesn't help, particularly the kind of classic, what we call kind of cytotoxic chemotherapy, the old type of chemotherapy. So they were less likely to get that. And importantly, they lived longer by 3 months. So while on average people who got chemotherapy, standard cancer care lived for 9 months, the people who got palliative care in addition lived for a year. That's as good or better than the chemotherapy. And importantly, no side effects from palliative care. No negative side effects. So imagine that, a medical treatment with no side effects. And in fact, based on this study and others, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the world's largest cancer doctor organization, has a guideline that recommends palliative care within 6 weeks of diagnosis of metastatic cancer. that you be seen by an expert team, palliative care team, doctor, nurse, social worker, chaplain. And importantly, in this guideline, they say there's benefit and there's never been a study that shows harm from palliative care. Because it helps you live well. Now, not every study shows that you live longer, to be fair. Not every study shows you live longer with palliative care, but there's never been a study that shows that you live less long. You're not giving anything up by pursuing palliative care at the same time. Of course, one of the challenges is if you tell your doctor that you want palliative care, the doctor might say, "Oh, you're not ready." By which they mean you're not dying today or tomorrow. But that's because a lot of doctors misunderstand. And so what I write in my book and what I would tell you is, you just tell your doctor, "Yeah, I understand that, I really appreciate that, but I've either read a book, or I heard a talk, or I read a study, and I really want palliative care. I want to pursue this treatment with you, and I want to get palliative care in addition." The other thing that studies of palliative care show, not this study that I just told you, but another piece of information I want to share with you, is that palliative care has also been demonstrated to help the loved ones of people who are sick. So if you enroll in hospice for at least a week, after you die, your spouse is less likely to die in the subsequent 18 months because you receive hospice services. And if you have cancer and you have a conversation with your doctor about the care you want as you get sicker, your loved one, after you die, is less likely to have depression and complicated grief 6 months after you die. So think about that for a moment. Care that's provided to an individual not only makes their care better, but it actually makes the care of their loved one better. There's not a lot of things like that. So think about that. If I take cholesterol medicine and my cholesterol gets better and my health is better, it doesn't impact my wife. Her health is not changed by whether or not I take that. The only thing I can think of that's like that is smoking cessation. If I can get someone to stop smoking, not only is their health better, but their loved one's health is better. All the people around them get better health. So palliative care and smoking cessation somehow go together, which seems unlikely, but true. All right. So one of the challenges is that we as doctors and nurses, we say kind of crazy things sometimes. And this is a problem. So here's one thing that we say in trying to understand what the kind of care that people want. I think leads to this confusion about quantity and quality. And so you come to see the doctor, you're in the emergency room, and the doctor says, "Would you like us to do everything possible?" And the answer is, yes. Why did I come here? What's the point, right? But think about that. It's a terrible question to ask when you're asking a question with only one answer. The answer is yes. I mean, think about it for a moment. Right? You bring your mother to the emergency room. And the doctor says, "Would you like us to do everything possible for your mom?" And you say, "You know, for my mom, half." Don't knock yourself out. My mom's a quitter, so don't worry about it. I always say that no mom is a quitter, right? There are no. Although yesterday we were talking in our team, and our nurse said, "I just want you to know, I'm not a fighter, and I'm a quitter." Just for the record. So this is just a terrible question. There's another reason this is a terrible question. When we say that as healthcare professionals, we actually mean that. We mean, do you want everything possible? If you come to UCSF Medical Center, this is a frightening array of interventions. We can put a tube everywhere. We can put you on a whole host of machines to regulate every part of your body, make you unconscious, draw your blood, replace your organs. It's really scary. And honestly, I don't think that when people say yes to this question, they're imagining all that, and they're signing up for all that stuff. But that's the question. And so we're just miscommunicating. Patients and families are like, yeah, everything possible is going to help. And so it's just a terrible question. So I teach my students and my residents, my clients, I say, do not ask this question. This is a terrible question to ask. But I would tell you, do not answer this question. This is one of the questions you just shouldn't answer. It's just, this is irrelevant. So what do you say instead? What I tell my colleagues to say, my students, is, how are you hoping we could help? That's the important question here. How are you hoping we could help? You came here for help. How can we help you? What I would say to you is to say, this is how we were hoping you could help. Oh, doctor, that's such a good question. Do I want everything possible? But let me tell you how I was hoping you could help. I'm having a lot of pain. I'm really fatigued. I'm uncomfortable. There's questions. I'm worried about what's going to happen in the future, and I'd like to talk to you about it. So talk in terminology, and we'll talk more about the issue of hope and how we talk about hope. I think it's a very useful construct to talk about the things we hope for, the things we want to have happen, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But I think that's the question. When you hear that question, that's how you should respond. So who needs palliative care? I sort of talked about this a little bit, but I just want to be explicit. I think about it in three ways. Like if you're thinking, when do I need palliative care? There's some combination of serious illness, utilization, as we think about it, I'll explain that in a minute, and function. And I'll tell you what all that means. But if you talk about serious illness, this is sort of the list I think about. Anyone with metastatic cancer, really. I mean, there's a guideline around it. While you're pursuing your chemotherapy and your radiation, everything else, that's great. There's a lot we can do. There's new immunotherapy and biologic therapies that are really changing the face of cancer. I think all those treatments are really important, and you should really think about them, but at the same time pursue palliative care. Someone with heart failure, COPD is like emphysema, for example, chronic bronchitis, and that stands for end-stage renal disease, so people who are on dialysis, for example. Cirrhosis is liver failure. And 2 admissions or visits to the emergency department, ED is the emergency department in 2 years. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Someone with a stroke, someone who has dementia, maybe not so early in the diagnosis of dementia, but certainly once you have dementia and you present with pneumonia, that's a bad sign. Not swallowing well, not eating well is a very serious sign. Parkinson's disease, ALS. Anyone on a transplant list, that's not a lot of people, but if you're on the heart transplant list, you really do need palliative. Because unfortunately, most people on the list do not get a transplant. The list is much longer than the availability of organs, unfortunately. Utilization means you're using a lot of health care. That's not a problem, but it is an indication that things are getting more serious. So if you end up in the hospital a lot, 1 hospitalization is not a big deal, but 3 in a year, multiple emergency department visits, those are signals either for you, your loved one, your friends, that, hey, you know, maybe you need some more help. And then function. The single best predictor of how we are doing is our function. What can you do? If you can feed yourself, and dress yourself, and bathe yourself, and take walks, that's good. That's the best predictor that you're going to be fine. But as those things get harder, that's a sign that this illness is in fact more serious. So thinking about that and looking at that and saying, wow, if I need more help, if my loved one needs more help, if my friend needs more help, that is a sign that things are more serious. And then one thing I talk to my students about is just to ask this question, would I be surprised if this patient, if this person died in the next year? And I offer that to doctors because that's actually a pretty useful question for who needs palliative care. It's actually been studied. Doctors are not very good at predicting who's going to die. This is a terrible question to figure out who's going to die. If you ask doctors, they don't get it right at all. But that's fine. That's not what we're trying to figure out. We're just trying to figure out who needs palliative care. It's a great question for palliative care. You may not know that, but it's something you could ask your doctor. Your doctor might be freaked out if you ask that question. Oh, no, not you, not you. And they might mean that because they like you and they don't want this to happen. But I think it could be a serious conversation starter about what's possible in the future. So what I want to leave you here with is that there's this myth about quantity and quality of life, that you have to choose about quantity or quality. And the point is that in serious illness, palliative care can help you do both. You can live well and you can live long. All right, the next myth. But talking about what's really going on will destroy hope. And this sounds something like this. I hear this in the hospital sometimes. Don't tell my mom she has cancer. Just don't tell her. I think, she's been coming to the UCSF Cancer Center for 3 years. And the letters are about 10 feet high on the side of the building. If you've ever been there. I mean, they're really big letters. You cannot miss it. And she's been getting chemotherapy at the infusion center, and everybody else there seems to have cancer. So what is she doing there? What does she imagine is going on? And that somehow if we don't talk about it, it won't be real, or it won't really happen, or we'll avoid somehow being sad. But the truth is there. It's just a question of whether we're going to talk about it. And what we know, the truth is that talking about hope encourages it. And it's only by talking about the things we hope for, that really matter to us, that are important, that we can really foster and encourage it. And so rather than ignoring it, we should be engaging it. And it's this recognition that hope is a durable part of the human experience. We all have it. It's just part of us. Even in the most dire circumstances, people still talk about the things they hope for. I see people in the very last days of life. When I ask them what they hope for, they have things they hope for. They don't say, well, there's nothing left. In fact, hope is so durable that when someone says, you know, I don't hope for anything, I'm hopeless, I worry that that's a sign of depression. Because hopelessness is actually a sign of depression. And while the typical diagnosis of depression has to do with your appetite, do you still do things you enjoy, I see lots of patients who tell me, yeah, you know, I love gardening, but I can't get into the garden anymore. I love taking walks, but that's not possible for me. But I still have things that I enjoy. So I look at my garden rather than going in and gardening myself, for example. But when someone says, yeah, you know, nothing I hope for, it's just hopeless, that's a sign of depression. And my brief point about that is that depression is treatable even late in illness, and it's not normal. Depression is not normal, even in serious illness. But even when we say, oh, who wouldn't be depressed? I mean, look, who wouldn't be depressed? The truth is, depression is not normal, and it can be treated even very late in illness. So what do people hope for with serious illness? Well, they hope for a lot of things. They hope for healing, even if they won't be cured. People hope for comfort in the face of suffering. And people hope for all the things that can be despite all the things that cannot be. So what does that mean? So a few years ago, we were taking care of a woman at UCSF. She was in her 70s. She had something called interstitial lung disease. Interstitial lung disease is a sort of scarring of the lungs. And it just keeps going. We don't have good treatments for it. People live for about 2 years, on average, some longer. Everyone gets short of breath, unfortunately, with this illness. And she got admitted to the hospital with pneumonia, very short of breath, ended up in our ICU on what we call high-flow oxygen, which is a particular kind of device to deliver very, very high levels of oxygen so that she wouldn't be short of breath. It's the kind of treatment you only receive in the ICU, and it allowed her to feel more comfortable and to interact with her family. And one day on rounds, we were there with the ICU team. I said, you know, we have to go ask her what she hopes for. And the team was like, oh my God, have you seen her? Like, what are you talking about? I said, no, this is important. So we went in. I said, no, I'm just wondering, when you think about how things are going, what do you hope will happen? What do you hope for? He says, well, I really hope to be at my daughter's wedding. I said, well, that's important. Tell us about that. Well, my daughter's getting married in the Napa Valley in 10 months. And I thought, I just want to see it. One, I don't think she's ever going to leave her ICU, because I don't see that we're going to be able to make her better enough. And two, I honestly don't think she's going to be here in 10 months. So we talked about it as a team, and then we talked with her and her daughter. And her daughter said, well, that's important to me too. I'm just going to get married right here, in the hospital. So they arranged it. A few days later, she came one morning in a beautiful white wedding gown, and her fiancé had his tuxedo on. They put a corsage on the patient's hospital gown. All the family, the priest, all the doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists just crowded around the room. Not a dry eye in our ICU. Beautiful wedding. Not the Napa Valley. Not the same, but a beautiful wedding. Because we talked about and asked what she hoped for, we were able to achieve something that was really important. And I think we have to have the courage to ask the question of each other. I think as doctors, what I tell my colleagues is, we have to have the courage to say, if that's important, let's talk about that. Because it's easy to say, oh, me too. I hope that happens. And what does she assume? She assumes, well, I brought it up, the doctor said me too, doctor must think it's going to happen. When the exact opposite was true. I thought it wasn't going to happen. By talking about what was important to her and what she hoped for, she got to achieve the thing that was important. And that is true for all of us in thinking and talking about what we hope for. Now, having said that, these are not easy things to talk about. I'll admit that. This is not like easy conversations where you just kind of sit around and start talking. But that is, in fact, what you have to do. So how do we talk about it? I call these golden questions because I think they are so valuable. And I share this with you, but I also teach this to my students. I have a medical student with me, or a resident, or a fellow, and we're going to talk to a patient. This is what I teach them. Simple stuff, but really helpful. When you think about the future, what do you hope for? You can think about that for yourself. What do you hope for? What's important to you? And when you think about what lies ahead, what worries you the most? Right? These are opposite sides of the same coin. What you hope for, that's what I want to have happen. What I'm worried about, that's the thing I want to avoid. I hope to be at my daughter's wedding. I hope to see my grandchild graduate from high school. I worry that I won't be able to take care of myself. I worry that I won't recognize my loved ones. I worry that I'll be in pain. These are the kinds of things that I hear in asking these questions. And it's really important to ask this question. I had a medical student with me, and I said, okay, these are the questions. Okay, so let's practice. And we practiced, and we went in, and we sat down, and we started talking. And this is a woman in her 50s with metastatic ovarian cancer, and said, when you think about the future, what do you hope will happen for your cancer? Oh, so close. But totally different question. Right? When she talked about, I don't know, maybe I'll be in the study, I might go to MD Anderson. My fault as a teacher. So, it took a while when we went back. And then when we asked her, what do you hope for? Totally different conversation. Right? Totally different. So think about these questions. To ask yourself, to ask your loved ones. So what is it that people say? Well, there's a survey of Californians. The California Healthcare Foundation did a survey of us a few years ago and asked, what are the most important things that you think about when you think about the end of life? And it's interesting what came up. Making sure my family is not burdened financially by my care was the thing that most people were interested in and worried about. Healthcare costs is the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. So this is a real thought. It's a real concern. Being comfortable without pain. Being at peace spiritually. We have a chaplain on our service because this is an issue that comes up for people who think about it. And the old joke is there's no atheist in a foxhole. It's right. I always think of the Bay Area as not being a particularly religious place, although we're in a church. I really think that when I say that. But nonetheless, that's where the answers are to the questions we have. So people turn to that. Even if they're not talking about religion, they often talk about spirituality and meaning and legacy, which are issues of what comes next. Science doesn't have answers for a lot of these things. Making sure my family is not burdened by tough decisions about my care. How do you do that? You got to tell them. You got an advance directive. Sign a document. Find someone who's going to make decisions for you if you cannot. Talk to them about those decisions. Make sure that the other people know who you've chosen. And I always say it's not about who you love the most, because you love everyone the same, right? Maybe. But it is about choosing the person who can speak for you. I remember talking to a patient with Parkinson's disease, and I asked her this question, like, who would speak for you if you couldn't? She said, well, this is hard, but it's not my husband. He's not going to be able to make the decisions I want. It's too hard for him. And it's not going to be my son. Same thing. It's going to be my daughter. And I talked to her about it. I said, well, that's really good to know. But if you don't tell your husband and your son, this is just going to be a mess if this happens. We have to talk with them as well, and you have to explain that to them. You have to have an advance care. Otherwise, your family will be burdened by decisions about your care if you get to a point where you can't. That's what the doctors and nurses do. They turn to your loved one and they say, tell me about your mom. What would she want if she was in this situation? And you're left trying to decide. And I would say, more often than not, you end up getting more intervention than you probably would choose for yourself. Because it's hard to say no for someone else. Living as long as possible was endorsed by 36% of people. So it's not to say that it's unimportant, it's just not the most important thing to the most people. But if you look at our healthcare system, you might decide and conclude that that's the only thing that's important. But it's not. And it's not even by far the most important thing to the most people. It's really taking a step back and thinking about what in fact is important to us. And that's why I like the hope question, because it really drives at what is most important to us. So the second myth is that talking about what's really going on, what the prognosis really is, what the options really are, is somehow going to, is a terrible thing and takes hope away. But I would submit to you that talking about hope encourages it. And I like to tell my patients sometimes, I say, we can wish that we had a different hand, but this is the hand we're dealt. So how do we make the best of this situation? Because we could hope that it was different somehow. It's not. And if we act like it's different somehow, we may end up making things worse, pursuing treatments that are in fact not going to help. So let's think about where we are and still talk about hope, but with a dose of reality. So that's the second myth. So what's the third myth? The third myth is that somehow the goal is to have a good death. And maybe you've heard this conversation in our society because we're having this conversation now. The Guardian of London newspaper about a month ago had an article that said, death is cool. I'm like, really? I had no idea. I'll tell my kids that death is cool. People are tired. Has anyone been to a death cafe or heard of a death cafe? Okay. Yeah, all right, well, there you go. So, you go and you talk about what your end of life, what you want it to look like, and I'm all for that. Let me just tell you. I think that contemplating our mortality is a good thing because it helps us live well today. I think that's a good reminder. But I don't think the goal is to have a good death. I don't see that as my job at all because I fundamentally don't see death as good. I think death is sad and it's filled with grief and loss. And to talk about it being good doesn't acknowledge that part of it. Let me give you an example. I took care of Mary, and when I met Mary, she was 102 years old. 2 weeks before I met her, she had bought a new car. And she was driving. And she was really proud because she bought a Prius, and she said, this is an environmentally conscious car. Today she would have bought some electric vehicle, I'm sure. She was really proud. Mary lived alone, a little row house in San Francisco. She was having lunch with her family, so she was still driving, eating, cooking. At 102, in the middle of lunch, she collapses at the table. They call the paramedics, they bring her to the ER. She's not breathing well, so they put a breathing tube down her throat on a ventilator. They do a scan of her head. They find she's had a massive stroke, a huge bleed in her brain that is not survivable. And that's when I met Mary, in the ICU at UCSF. And her family was gathered. And I asked them about, tell me about Mary. And that's when I heard this story. And after they told the story, they said, and she's had a good long life. And I think we would all agree. 102 driving your own car, that's a good long life. And she doesn't want all this. So can we just stop it and let her die? And I said, absolutely, we can do that, and we'll take good care of her. And I thought to myself, okay, that's about as good as it's going to get. Right? You get to be 102, you're not sick, and then in an instant, you don't even know it, you just die. And many people tell me that, like, that's what I want to have happen to me. I hope that happens to me. Actually, most people tell me I want to die in my sleep. Like, that's better. Which I think is true, Except for the person who wakes up in the bed next to you. I think that's a little creepy. But it does happen. It actually happens a lot. So it's not that, it's weird, but it does happen. But I think that's a little creepy. So I think the dining room table might be better. There was so much grief and loss in the room. They really missed her. Nobody thought she was going to live forever. There was a lot of grief and loss. And I think to say, oh, look, she had a good death, just negates that emotion that we all have. And so I think that we should have a comfortable end, and we should be dignified, and we should be peaceful at the end of our lives. But that doesn't make it fundamentally good, even if we describe it that way. And so I see that the goal, really, the truth is to live a good life. And that our job is to think about how can we live well every single day, make every day as good as possible in the face of serious illness, and it's possible to do that. And as I said, I think death cafes and I think the conversations that we are having in our society about mortality and about the end of life are good conversations, but not because it's going to change necessarily the end of life, but because it's going to change how we live our lives today. And that's really the most important thing. I was at a conference called End Well in San Francisco. They were talking about sort of how do you change kind of serious illness and life. And someone said, well, there's how do you, and so there's this idea now about extreme longevity. Have you heard about this? Like living to be 150, living to be 200, 300 years old. I thought, that's fine. I think, a couple of thoughts I always have about this. I said, I think most people think if you live to be 150, you're going to live for 100 years like you're 50. But what if you live for 50 years like you're 100? I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. I'm jury's out. And someone says, well, why do you want to live to be 300? I'm like, well, if I live to be 300, I can learn to speak Spanish, Chinese, and Arabic. I can learn to play the piano, and the violin, and the trumpet. And I just think, well, you're not doing any of that today. Like today, you speak English. And today, you can learn any of those languages today. So my thought is, when you're 297 years old, you're going to think, oh my God, I want to learn all those languages. And so I don't think it's about longevity. I think it's about what we do today and how we live our lives today. And mortality makes today very urgent for us. Okay, so having said that it's not about the end of life, I do want you to imagine for a moment the end of your life. Okay, imagine what that's like. Where are you? What is it like? Who are you with? Just imagine. Okay. How many people had this image in mind? No, maybe one. And not just because it's UCSF, right? It's just like any ICU. Right. Most of us do not imagine this. This is not our image. But a third of Americans die in hospitals. Most of those hospitalizations include time in the ICU. This is not where people want to be. So why does that happen? Well, it happens for legitimate reasons. I would argue that Mary's time in the ICU was legitimate. We didn't know what she had. Maybe she had something she could survive. Lived to be 103 or 5. But that was legitimate. And then our challenge is, okay, now she's in the ICU. How do we make that place peaceful, comfortable, dignified for her and her family? And there are things we can do to make that happen. But more often than not, what happens is you know that it's coming. You can see it from a mile away. Someone with heart failure, someone with metastatic cancer, someone with ALS. You can see that they're going to end up in the ICU. If they don't make a decision against it, they're going to end up in the ICU. And they're going to be on a whole bunch of these tubes and machines and monitors. And that's fine if that is what you want. There's no problem with that if that's what you want. If you don't want it, you have to talk about it. And you have to let people know. Otherwise, that is in fact where you're going to end up. I want to just read something from my book that sort of gets to this point. And it's something, it's a short story. It's like a 30-second story about my grandmother, my sophomore. My Safta used to sign birthday cards with the wish that you should live to 120. Because Moses lived to 120, and a traditional birthday wish is that you should have a long life like Moses, the greatest teacher and leader of the Jewish people. But as she got older, she changed it just a bit. In Hebrew, she changed just one letter, and the change in meaning was profound. Rather than writing live to 120, she wrote live to 100 like 20. Live long and live well. My Safta understood that a good life is even more important than a long life. And she lived that saying and declined chemotherapy when she was diagnosed with lung cancer at age 93. Now, not all of us will live that long, but we can all live the essence of that saying by living well. And that's really our goal, is how do we live well? And to make sure that when someone asks us that question, do you want everything possible, that we answer in the right way. And let me just tell you a story about that. We had a woman, she was in her 80s, and she had metastatic colon cancer, Chinese family. She was at home receiving hospice services. And one morning, her family comes to see her. And she's different. Clearly she's done. And they panic. And when you enroll in hospice, one of the things they tell you is, if something happens, call hospice. Do not call 911. But in the moment, people do worry and they call 911. That's what they did. So the paramedics came and whisked her off to the hospital. Came to the hospital, and the doctor said, would you like us to do everything possible, as I talked about before, right? And the family said, yes. So they immediately call the ICU team, they call the medicine team. We have this patient. She's very sick, she's probably has a bad infection, and her blood pressure is low. She's going to need big IVs and antibiotics and probably on a breathing machine and maybe some dialysis. My colleague, Steve McPhee, happened to be on call for the medicine team. He heard the story, and he ran downstairs into the ER, beat the ICU team. Pulled the family aside and looked at the patient, like, okay. Pulled the family aside, heard the story. Said, your mom is very sick. Yes, we know. How are you hoping we can help? And her daughter held up a shopping bag, and she said, we brought new clothes, because we need to dress her in new clothes for her journey to the next life. He said, well, that's really important. And if we need to do that, we should do that right here in the ER. And she's really uncomfortable with her breathing, so I think we should give her some medicine for that. Yes, please. And, upstairs we have a quiet room. We call it our comfort care suite. We have 3 of those in our hospital. And you can all be with her and spend time with her. Yes, that's what we want. She was this close to this. And I know what happens, because I've seen this story play out 100,000 times. About the 3rd day in the hospital, 3rd or 4th day, on round, someone says, what is the matter with this crazy family? Don't they understand? And the answer is, yeah, of course they understand. We asked the wrong question. They gave us the answer they thought they understood, and she got care she didn't want. Now, I'm not suggesting that every time that the answer is always going to be, I want to be just comfortable and help me be comfortable, and I journey to the next life. But the issue is you want to get it right for you. And if this is not what you want, that's something you have to talk about. Otherwise, that is what you get. That's how it goes. So, to get back to our airplane analogy, the real issue is, can we, recognizing that every flight is going to end, can we bring it down for a smooth landing? And too often in medicine, we forget that every flight has to land, and so we just keep flying the plane. And the fuel gauge is going down, 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 and we just fly the plane. And then one engine goes out, and we just fly the plane. And then all of a sudden, we're surprised that there's no fuel left. And the plane starts to fall out of the sky and, in fact, crashes on the ground. And it's a surprise. And there's a lot of debris and a lot of hurt where it didn't have to be. So the myth is that somehow it's all about the good death, and I would submit to you it's not. It's really about the good life. And at the end of a good life, because we've been thoughtful about it, we do have a peaceful, comfortable, dignified ending. And by planning around that and thinking about what that means, we can actually achieve that. I just want to, last slide I want to show you before wrapping up, is this painting. It's not projecting very well, but it's a painting of the doctor. Maybe you've seen it before. It was painted by Sir Luke Fields in 1891. It hangs in the Tate Britain Gallery in London. It's a very large painting, much, much bigger than this. 3 times bigger than this. And it's sort of the iconic, respectful picture of the doctor. And it's interesting, Sir Luke Fields in 1891 had a commission from one of his patrons who said, paint whatever you want. And so he painted this painting in honor of the doctor who took care of his son, who died. This is not painted because the doctor saved his son's life. To be fair, in 1891, doctors weren't saving a lot of lives. To be perfectly honest, there wasn't that much to do. If you look here, there is a cup of tea, but I think that's for the doctor, actually not for the patient. And it's not medical. If you remember that ICU picture, this looks nothing like that. This is the home. There's no monitors, there's no IV poles, there's nothing medical going on. So why paint a respectful picture? And I would submit it's because there's something really important going on here. But the doctor's really patient. And this is called the doctor. It could be the nurse. It could be a social worker. It could be a chaplain. That's how we practice. My point in showing you this is that having someone to walk with you through the journey of serious illness is very important. And choosing the right healthcare team is really important. People that you jive with who are willing to have those conversations with you that are really meaningful and important. That's what we try to do as a palliative care team with our patients is to supplement the care, add to the care that people are getting rather than necessarily replacing it, and to think about that. I really love this painting because I think it speaks a lot to what's most important about medicine and why people go into it and what they often kind of lose sight of and need to be pulled back. So this was about 10 years ago. We were in London, and I was with my boys. I had 3 boys, and I said, I want to go see this painting in this museum. They're like, oh my God. One painting. Daddy needs to go see one painting. They're like, you promise, one painting. Okay, one painting. So we get to the Tate Britain Gallery, and I get the map because I'm trying to stick to my promise, and I open the map, and I find the gallery that it's in, so that's fine. And we start walking gallery, and we get to this painting, and it's like I'm having like a moment, and I'm making a pilgrimage to this painting. I stand in front of it, and my son looks up and he goes, "This is the painting?" I don't know what he was imagining. He was like, "This painting?" Yeah, look at this. Loss of an 8-year-old, but nonetheless, that's how it goes. All right, so life after the diagnosis. You can live well, and palliative care can help you live well and long with serious illness. I think if you take one thing away from today, it's to really pursue palliative care. You can find it. Unfortunately, it's not as ubiquitous as we'd like it to be. I think by asking for it, you will make more of it happen. Health systems are sensitive to the demands of patients and families and to the requests. If you choose your health care based on that, that will make a huge difference. And I can tell you that there are programs like this that are growing all over. Home-based palliative care programs, office-based, hospital-based. The good news is pretty much every hospital in the Bay Area now offers palliative care services, including the ones here in the East Bay. I think that's great. If you're in the hospital with a serious illness, ask for one. If they tell you you're not ready for it, just tell them, yeah, I got it. I just want a palliative care. What's that? Kaiser is great, actually. Kaiser has done a really nice job with it and has it available in every setting of care. So yes, they've done a really nice job. So make sure you get it for you and your loved one. Talk about what you hope for because it will encourage and nurture it. So talk about those things, have those conversations. They're difficult but incredibly meaningful. And the goal is to live a good life in the face of serious illness. How are we going to live well? How will we make decisions that will support us in living well every day? And that's ultimately the goal. And if we do these things, if we really think about how we face our serious illness and understand the truth behind it, we can live well in the face of serious illness. It is one of the great challenges that we face in our lives, and yet there's a lot that we can do to make that better. And ultimately, it comes down to caring. How do we care for each other? How do we make sure we get good care for ourselves? And how do we make sure that the healthcare system helps us receive the care that we really want? And so I'm going to close by giving you a quiz. Did they tell you to get a quiz? You don't usually get quizzes? I see people taking notes. No, you don't actually. This is the easiest quiz you've ever had. For two reasons. One, you don't have to write anything down. And two, I will not grade you. So you can't fail. Easiest quiz. I like this quiz because it makes the point about caring. So just follow along. I'm going to just put this up. This is the view outside of one of the comfort care suites at UCSF. All right, so just follow along. Name the 5 wealthiest people in the world. Name the last 5 Heisman Trophy winners. Name 10 people who have won the Nobel or Pulitzer Prize. Name the last half dozen Academy Award winners for Best Actor and Actress. Name the last decade's worth of World Series winners. You had to do it. Terrible, right? It's terrible. Terrible. But think about it. The point is that none of us remembers the headliners of yesterday. But think about it. These people are no second-rate achievers. They are the best in their fields. But the applause dies, awards tarnish, achievements are forgotten. So I'm going to ask you, to leave you another quiz, and we'll see how you do on this one. List a few teachers who aided your journey through school. Name 3 friends who have helped you through difficult times. Name 5 people who have taught you something worthwhile. Think of a few people who have made you feel appreciated. Name half a dozen heroes whose stories have inspired you. Easier? Sure. The lesson. The people who make a difference in our lives are not the ones with the most money, the most credentials, or the most awards. They're the ones who care. Thank you all very much. Wow.
I want to say something that I was remiss to say before. Wonderful programs like this do not happen because of 1 or 2 people. We are, Ashby Village is a volunteer-run organization. And I want you to help me thank all the wonderful volunteers who really were extremely instrumental at each step of the way of planning this program, including making this room beautiful for all of you, and the food, and the taping, and everything. So I want you, are there any other volunteers? Please come and raise your hands. You can see them in the back, and let's give them a round. I want to thank my colleagues and the director of Ashby Village, Andy, for the support that I received from each one of them, Manuela, Andy, and Pat, in putting this program together. So let's thank them as well. We won't be able to answer all the questions, but we will make an attempt to answer questions that reflect general concerns.
Oh, these are such great questions. We can go all day. Okay. confused by the concept of a dignified death. What do you mean when you use the term? That is such a good question. I don't mean anything other than what it means to an individual. The first part was confused by what it means to have a dignified death. I think it really is what you think. It's really individualized. You know, it's interesting. People talk about death with dignity to describe aid in dying, the End-of-Life Option Act. In Oregon, they call it death with dignity. So they use the word dignity to describe that process, which applies to very few people. Other people think that's not dignified at all, that the dignity of human life means that we don't end it before it needs to be ended. So it's one of those words that only has meaning in the way we define it. And it's one of the things I talk about in my book, that doctors use the word, let's help them be dignified, to suggest that somehow all this care they're getting in the ICU is somehow undignified. And it's kind of a shorthand way of saying, let's stop all this stuff because let's let them have a dignified end, which means without a lot of machines. But frankly, for a lot of people, that's not an affront to their dignity. And so I would encourage each of us to think about what that means, about our own dignity, and it's really defined individually rather than any standard. I think we have to be cautious when people use the word dignified death or try to define it for someone else. Let's see. Okay, great. Okay, so we got this one. Great. How can I request palliative care team services as part of an advanced healthcare directive? Yeah, so great question. In the advanced healthcare directive, there's a section where you can add stuff. Just put it in there. If I am faced with a serious illness, I would like to receive palliative care services. I think that's a great thing to put on an advanced directive and to tell your family about that. So it should be pretty straightforward to do that and to add to your advanced directive. We do have a few questions about the End-of-Life Option Act and about physician aid in dying. It's been about a year and a half now in California that it's been available. What can I say? It's available in many healthcare systems, but not all healthcare systems. So Kaiser, notably, all the UC healthcare systems, Stanford, do make it available. We could do a whole day talking about it. In fact, I've done that. I've been part of conferences. What can I say? I think that for people who are really worried about what the end may entail and really want a sense of control over that period, I think it's a reasonable option for people. And we do make it available, and we have a policy at UCSF, and many other systems do. I think that a lot of the things people worry about are things that we can help with and take care of. And so my question always is when someone brings it up, why are you bringing it up today? Tell me what you're worried about. Because my experience is that it's most often worry about what's going to happen. It's not about today. It's really about some future that people are worried about. And that's a really important conversation to have. And anyone in your healthcare, among your healthcare providers, should be willing to have that conversation with you. So if your doctor says, I don't do that, so we're not going to talk about it, I think there's still a really important conversation about what you're worried about. And what I would say is, because the other thing I would say is if that's really important to you, personally, it's something you should talk to your doctor about relatively early. My experience is that many doctors are still uncomfortable with it. And in many ways, I think the public is out in front of physicians in interest. And so if it's really important to you, you do need to just ask your doctor, is this something you would consider, you'd be willing to do? If the doctor says, that's not what I do, just to think about whether you need a new doctor or get referred to somebody. There's also doctors who made a referral practice out of it. There was a physician here in Berkeley, in fact, Lonnie Chavez, he does that. So it is possible to find. So that's what I would say. But I would also reassure people that there's a lot that we can do to address the concerns that really drive it. So we talked about this. It sounds like almost everyone in memory care or assisted living can use palliative care. That's true. Are the facilities providing the equivalent of palliative care? No, they're not. I think the challenge is, when you actually look at the population of people, if you look at the number of people who really need palliative care, it's actually a really big number. And while we do our best at UCSF to provide that care, honestly, I don't, if everybody actually listened to what I said and asked for palliative care, there just wouldn't be enough of it in America available. So what does that mean? It means that really all of us in healthcare have to be doing some palliative care. Every doctor, every nurse, every social worker, every chaplain. And we are undertaking that now. How do we educate our colleagues? How do we educate medical and nursing students and social work students and chaplaincy interns so that we can provide it much more broadly? In the same way that most people with diabetes do not see a diabetes specialist and just a gland specialist. Most people get that care from their primary care doctor or nurse practitioner. I think that's going to be the truth about palliative care. The most important thing is that these issues get addressed. Things like pain and shortness of breath and fatigue. And then you have someone you can talk to realistically about your hopes and fears and wishes and plans for the future, and that you get support for your emotional, psychological, kind of social needs. That's the most important thing, that those things get addressed appropriately. And if things are beyond the capabilities of your healthcare team, that you then get help from a palliative care team. So I think now it's really still good to ask, but also to know the kinds of issues that you want to have addressed. So if you get palliative care, what do you get? So that's a good question. So in whatever setting you get it, what you get is you get a doctor, nurse, social worker, and chaplain who come and meet with you. Sometimes all together, sometimes, two at a time. And we have a conversation about the things we talk about. How are we feeling? How are we doing? What are you worried about? What do you hope for? These are the things we talk about. We ask about symptoms routinely, pain and shortness of breath and fatigue and nausea. We can try to treat those symptoms. You see that as job one. It's hard to think about the other things you care about if you're in pain all the time, if you're nauseous, fatigue. We try to treat those things. We talk about the things that are important to you and how we can help achieve those things. And then there's a lot of practical things, just about how do I get the help I need? How do I get the care I need? Can I get someone in the home? What about managing these issues? People have a lot of worries, anxiety. We try to help with that, not just with medications, but in other ways. We talk about spiritual care. Our chaplain does mindfulness with some people who have a lot of anxiety and finds that can be helpful. So it's a variety of things, but that's basically it. And then there's follow-up depending on how often you need it, just like follow-up with any other medical team. So you're looking for a palliative care doctor in the Berkeley, El Cerrito area. I've been able to find them. Wow. And wherever that is, I'm happy to talk to someone who's looking in this area. There are doctors here. I know that at Alta Bates and Sutter, they actually have, I have colleagues there who are really wonderful. And I think they have a clinic now. Jeff Stoneberg is my colleague who's there. And Jeff is really wonderful. He's just a wonderful, lovely, you know him? Yeah, Jeff is really great. And so he's at the Sutter Alta Bates, Summit Alta Bates campus. So I think that's one place to begin looking for palliative care. You can ask your doctor. I always say, serious illness is not a thing you can Google your way through. It's like really hard. You go on the internet, you're going to find all kinds of crazy stuff. And the crazier it sounds, the crazier it is. But that's through the internet generally, I would say. So I think it's hard to figure this out just on the internet. But I do recommend in my book that if you're looking for palliative care, just put in palliative care Berkeley and see what you get. I bet you'll get a few hits. No? Really? You've tried it and it's not in there?
There are a couple of palliative care doctors at Sutter all the days, but their practices are closed.
Oh.
They're not taking any more patients.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Anybody who can go into the home, palliative care doctor.
Oh, is that right?
Well, not that I've been able to find.
Yeah, that's getting harder. You can check with your local hospice agencies. They are developing home-based palliative care programs. So I would check with the local hospices, Hospice of the East Bay, VITAS. Some of them are developing palliative care programs for people who are homebound. So I would look into that as well. And then the home-based palliative care programs are being developed by insurers as well. So Blue Shield of California, HealthNet are developing home-based palliative care programs for people who are homebound. So it depends a little bit on your insurance. But this is a problem, and again, I would just encourage you that I think there's some advocacy to be done by all of us to be making those requests of the health systems in which we get care. And if it's not available, say, hey, why is this not available? People do listen to it. Is progress being, how about this last question? Is progress being made in our medical school to expose medical students to this information? Yes. Yes. I think that's one of the great things. So when I was in medical school, which was a little while ago, the answer was no. We had no palliative care at UCSF. I never heard the word while I was in medical school or in my training. Literally never heard the word. We had no palliative care, and that was true of medical schools across the country. Two of my colleagues, Steve McPhee and Mike Grabo, did a study where they read medical textbooks, this 1,000-page medical textbook, and looked for content on palliative care. So this is a book filled with diseases that kill people and make them sick. No content on palliative care. So that's changed. Textbooks now included. There's curriculum in virtually every medical school, and every medical student in the country now trains in a place where there's at least 1 or 2 palliative care services, so everyone's getting exposed. So it makes me very optimistic about the future. I think some of my colleagues who practiced before there was palliative care still don't understand it, and I always say they'll retire. Sometimes that's what you got to wait for. But also, I think I'm very optimistic about the future. Okay. Thank you.